Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks. I am flying solo today, and I'd like to take a few moments to talk about authors from the Outer Banks typically. I know there's a lot of authors that have written about the Outer Banks. Most of them have not lived here, and that's not a big deal. I still appreciate that, but I specifically want to talk about a few authors that I have met or had a chance to talk to. And first of all, before I get into the authors themselves, I want to talk about some of the types of books. So I've been researching, looking at which books have been written about the Outer Banks, and they kind of fall into a few different categories. One is biographies. Of course, you have people like the Wright brothers, Annie Griffith. You might have some lesser-known celebrities, maybe an Ernie Bowden or some of the women of the Outer Banks that have helped shape this area for the better. Another category is historical. Obviously, a lot of history. And when you think about it, there's been a lot of significant historical events on the Outer Banks, which is kind of amazing because it's a very simple area. I mean, we're not a huge metropolis. There's not a ton of people here, but we've continued over the centuries to have a lot of significant things going on. Obviously, the Native Americans had a significant presence here a long time ago. Lost Colony came here, followed by the maritime trade and the settling of the colonies and that type of thing. The Civil War had a few incidences here. Obviously, flight was invented here. And World War II, this was a big outpost for World War II, protecting the water channels, the supply channels, so to speak, and protecting our eastern coast. Another category is fiction, and I broke down fiction as typically mystery, adventure, romance, and a lot of books have been written about that. I think a lot of romantic people or romantic writers, so to speak, have appreciate the Outer Banks. They love the Outer Banks, and so they decide to write something compelling and entertaining. And that may be the biggest category that I see from writers on the Outer Banks. Of course, a smaller category is science. Obviously, the biological diversity we have on the Outer Banks with the Gulf Stream right here. We have maritime forests, wetlands, just all the biology and sea life makes it an amazing place. The hurricanes, just a lot of interest in that. Finally, another category is oral history. There's generations of people that have lived here, grown up here, what have you. And, there's a great book on the Nag's Head Woods. There's a book on Buffalo City. And of course, the people of Manteo have just been here for centuries. And a few people have been smart enough to record these conversations with the people about their parents, grandparents, what have you. So there's several categories that fall into place right here. There are three authors that I want to focus on in this talk. And that is, the first one is Audra Krieg. Audra Krieg is a person who wears many hats on the Outer Banks. I've had the pleasure to know Audra for several years. I taught one of her daughters in preschool. I coached her oldest child, her son Joey, on the lacrosse team at First Flight last year. And she does a little bit of everything. She's quite the force of nature. And she put out a book called The Parker House. The Parker House is a children's mystery, and it takes place in Kitty Hawk, Southern Shores. Audra, like me, lives in Southern Shores right next to Kitty Hawk. And, it's funny. I think it's one of those books, and most of these books, I will say, if you know the area, you're probably going to appreciate it a lot more. If you don't know the area, I think they're still good books, but you might not appreciate some of the nuances that were written into the stories. And Audra loves to tell stories to her children before they go to bed. She loves to plug their names into the stories to make it more interesting. And she just took that whole recipe and made a book out of it. And in the Parker House, she uses her oldest son's name, Joey, as the main character. And Joey, I found it interesting, would go to places like Art's Place, which is a real burger joint, breakfast joint on the beach road in Kitty Hawk, and he would, refuel at Art's place before he hit the surf. And I, having raised three kids on the Outer Banks, I can't help but see the similarities with her kids and my kids. Just, what a day in the life is really like. If you're a kid living on the Outer Banks, you're gonna probably grab something to eat nearby, and then you're gonna hit the beach and go hang out with friends. That's pretty typical. So, it definitely has a sense of realism as she's telling the story there. I am trying to get Audra on the podcast to record an episode. I'm still working on it. Hopefully she agrees to a time and a date we can get together. I think it'd be great. We can talk about not just her book, but I think she may have some future projects in the hopper she's working on. And I know she does some other cool stuff, like she's a beach photographer as well as a person on social media. Anyway, so check out the Parker House if you get a chance. Again, it is a children's mystery for young people. I enjoyed it. Just, like I said before, just how she shares some of the local culture and community in the story was definitely kind of cool. Another author, I should say, is a gentleman named John Railey. John Railey technically does not live on the Outer Banks, but he grew up spending every one of his summers on the Outer Banks. So he's got a firsthand knowledge of a lot of people, places. He's worked down here in the summers when he was in college, high school, and he knows the Outer Banks extremely well. So I give him a pass on being a resident of the Outer Banks. He's definitely earned his stripes there. And he's written 2 books based on the Outer Banks. And by the way, he was in episode number 4. Shucks, I forget. It's episode 4 or 5. So he's on one of our podcasts. And he wrote, the first book he wrote about the Outer Banks is called The Lost Colony Murder on the Outer Banks. And to take a little snapshot from the Amazon page, it's a biography. And it's placed in the summer of 1967. A 19-year-old Brenda Joyce Holland disappeared. She was a mountain girl who had come to Manteo to work in the outdoor drama, The Lost Colony. Her body was found 5 days later floating in the Sound. And it's something straight out of a Dateline episode of a murder mystery. It's a real-life murder mystery. They still have not found out who actually killed her. Although John Railey does a great job of researching the subject, the police reports. He's interviewed the locals and talked to a lot of people about it. And in the book, he kind of lays out, in the final chapter, he kind of lays out who he thinks did it. And it's up to you to kind of, believe it or dispute it as you wish. But I think he does a great job of that. And, again, because he knows the terrain, he knows the community, he does a great job of painting a picture of Manteo, a sleepy, quiet Manteo in the summer of 1967, when John Railey was, 8 or 9 years old or something like that. I can't remember, but he was a young boy when that whole murder went down. So he does remember it, and he goes back as an adult and reports on it. So definitely a very cool book. Since then, he has put out another book on the Outer Banks, and it's called Andy Griffith's Manteo, His Real Mayberry. And to take a little quote away from the Amazon page, author and journalist John Railey paints an intimate portrait of Andy based on interviews with many of those who knew him best on the sand, where he lived and died. So Andy Griffith, he had a second home here with his first wife. He spent time here in his when he had free time, and he spent his working days in California, usually recording episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. As you know, Andy Griffith, if you're my age, if you're 57 years old, and if you grew up in the DC area where we only had 4 or 5 TV channels, you were probably forced to watch a lot of Andy Griffith reruns. So I've seen quite a few Andy Griffith shows, very familiar with the show and the characters, and definitely thought he was just one of those idyllic fathers who was very wise and very calm and just very cool in his dealings with his son Opie, who is played by Ron Howard. And I don't know, it was a very wholesome show. And it's very cool to know that Andy Griffith lived in Manteo and he retired in Manteo. He lived there till his dying day and is buried in the backyard of his Manteo home. So John Railey, from what I understand in his writings, as he was interviewing people for his previous book, he started making good friends and relations with those people. They began to trust him. And since Andy Griffith had been dead for several years, I think people finally felt it was okay to open up and share some of the, more personal stories of Andy Griffith. Bottom line, he was a private man, but at the same time, he was a generous person. He loved the community. That's why he chose to stay here and retire here. And in return, the community loved him and they protected him. It is kind of a private community. They won't necessarily open up too quickly for you, and they eventually opened up for Andy when they realized they could trust him, and like I said before, they protected him. They didn't share any stories with the press or media, and they didn't dish any dirt on him. And even in this story, this book, they don't dish. You kind of see the times when he got irritated a little bit when maybe his privacy was compromised or what have you, but all in all, he was still the same wholesome guy you saw on TV. And he loved Manteo because, well, maybe not because, but it was very similar to his Mayberry on TV. So, and if you know Manteo, if you've been to Manteo, you might agree. I would agree. I love Manteo. I love its sleepiness. I love how quiet it is. I love just being able to sit on, on the sidewalk at an eatery and just talking to people. It's definitely a cool town. And if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. So that's John Railey, 2 books, The Lost Colony Murder on the Outer Banks and Andy Griffith's Manteo, His Real Mayberry. Feel free to check them out. Grab those books. I think you'll enjoy them. The third author is Angel Khoury. I have not met face-to-face, but I have reached out to her online, and I am trying to sign her up to record an episode. I think she'll be a great guest to have. Keep your eyes open for that. It should happen pretty soon. I'm crossing my fingers. But she has also written 2 books regarding the Outer Banks. The first book was called Manteo, a Roanoke Island Town. And to take a snapshot from the back cover of that book, it says, basically, this book is an engaging story of the culture and life on an island, complemented by hundreds of photographs from the late 1800s to the present. Chapters devoted to the Lost Colony, Elizabethan Gardens, and the Elizabeth II. So this book came out in 1999. I think that was right around the century mark for the town of Manteo, or the celebration of the town of Manteo as being an incorporated town, I believe. Feel free to check that. But they put this book out. She put this book out, and just, again, obviously interviewing and doing some research and sharing that with a lot of people. I have not read that book. It's actually hard to find. I tried looking for it, but it can be found, and I probably should grab it because, again, I love Manteo. I would love to see some of the old pictures and all that good stuff. Her more recent book came out just a year or 2 ago. It's called Between Tides, and to take a little snapshot from Amazon, it's based in the 1890s, or around the 1890s. Between tides, a man deserts his wife and his post as keeper of the Chatham Beach Life-Saving Station to start a new family far up to the south at Cape Hatteras. That's an extremely overly simplified version of the story. The story is actually much more complex and much more complicated. Basically, he was the man with 2 families. He had a wife in Cape Cod, and he kind of ditched her seasonally, so to speak, and came down to Cape Hatteras and then migrated to Manteo, where he married another woman and had another family. And for a while there, he was going back and forth between the seasons, spending most of his winters on the Outer Banks, with, there was hunting and life saving and this, that, and the other thing. And then he would go back up to Cape Cod in the summer times and probably do the same thing, hunting, guiding, that type of fishing, that type of thing. I will tell you, the book is very poetically written, and it's very impressive. When I bought it, first of all, I was kind of thinking it was some kind of romance novel. I I was intrigued by it because I'd heard the story behind the story, which was there was a real life woman. This is a fiction. I should back up. This is a fictional book, but it's based on a real story. Angel found the daughter of this man and started finding out the story, and that intrigued me when I found out that it had some truth and that there was a real guy here on the Outer Banks with this very interesting past, I should say. I was intrigued. I wanted to read the book and just see how she fleshed this out. And like I said, it's very poetic. It's she definitely took some artistic liberties. I get it, but basically she didn't have a whole lot to work with. She researched it as best she could, and she found some interesting things, and she just kind of wove it into a story, which was really cool. When I bought the book, I was expecting just to fly through this book, and what I found was very quickly was it was very poetically written, and that I was going to have to bring my A game because it was going to make me think, and I'm okay with that. I enjoy a story or book that makes me stretch my mind. I don't like stuff that's written too simply. I like good writing, and this made me think. It made me reread some sections. It made me Google some things. It was definitely written extremely well, but it can be complicated. If your mind wanders too much, you might not enjoy it. But I definitely enjoyed it. I think she did a great job with it. Somebody that reviewed the book said that you might want to start with the afterword first, and I might agree with that. I probably would agree with that because I'm reading the book and I knew the story behind the story, so I was, kind of figuring things out on the fly. And then at the very end of the book, she has the afterword where she explains, well, this is what I found, and this is why I added this, and this is something here, and here was a dead end, so I had to fabricate this, and it all kind of puts a perfect little bow on this present. And I would say that if you read that first, if you don't quite understand the story behind the story, you might want to read that first, and that might make the story make more sense for you. And I think now I'm actually rereading the book to prepare myself for this hopeful recording with Angel Khoury. So I'm trying to get myself back up to speed with it because it's been over a year since I read the story. And I'm finding that the second time that I read the story, it's making a lot more sense, and it's going a lot faster, and it's just a little bit more interesting. I can enjoy it just a little bit more. But like I said, I like to stretch my mind, and this was a good place to stretch it. And again, what all these authors do is just they paint a very realistic view of the Outer Banks. I mean, again, Angel Khoury, like the other authors, uses real life places, real life businesses, real life bodies of water, and she just sews the story right into those places, and I can appreciate that. I used to own a water sports business for 10 or 15 years. I think it was about 15 years over at Kitty Hawk Water Sports. I was on the Roanoke Sound. I have boated over to Shallabag Bay in downtown Manteo. I've been in John's Ditch and all these places she mentions in her story, Between Tides. So it's kind of cool to, and she does an excellent job of painting a picture of those places. So I love hearing about it. And she shares some of the biodiversity of these places. She talks about the fish and the crabs and the clams and the oysters and the shrimp, and I've been in those waters a lot, and I can definitely appreciate that. So that was definitely cool for me. So that's my third author, Angel Khoury. Check out her two books, Between Tides and Manteo, a Roanoke Island town. And since I'm talking to you about the books and maybe getting those books, I should talk about bookstores. So I'm going to mention a few bookstores, and these are the bookstores I'm familiar with. There's a few more bookstores that I don't mention here. I'm not trying to pigeonhole you into one place or the other. These are just the ones I'm familiar with. So, and I should say that I do use Amazon from time to time. Amazon is pretty cool. I do some Kindle reading, and on Amazon you can get those Kindle books immediately and start diving into them right away. But I think there's just something cool about buying a real book from the author at these local bookstores. These local bookstores often have author signings. I think it's great to go out and meet those authors. I did get to meet John Railey face to face at a book signing at Downtown Books in Manteo. Super nice guy, signed the book for me. And I just think it's great. It's kind of a one hand washes the other. The bookstores are helping the authors are trying to help the bookstores, and we can all help the bookstores out by just going there and giving them our business. And I think it's a good thing. There's nothing better than gifting a book. I mean, I guess that I'm sure there's something better than gifting a book, but I always think it's cool gifting a book. If you really enjoy a book and you know somebody else that's going to enjoy that book, buy another book, give it to somebody else. And again, you've helped everybody out and you've shared that, something special with one of your friends. So I highly recommend that. The bookstores, what I'm familiar with. So I've already mentioned Downtown Books in Manteo. Love Downtown Books in Manteo. I've told you I love Manteo. I love walking around, and if I walk around, I'm probably going to swing by that bookstore and hop in there. I'm pretty sure they're open all year long. Just a cool little place. They have a great table just for Outer Banks stories and authors and books, and I usually just hang out at that table and see what's out there and try to grab something new. They have a sister store in Duck at the Waterfront Shops. If you go into the parking lot at Waterfront Shops, there's the Duck's Cottage, and it's a coffee shop. And I love going there and grabbing a cup of coffee, maybe grab a book or a magazine or something, and walking around the Waterfront Shops, sit on a bench, and just enjoy my coffee and check out my new book. So I highly recommend those two sister stores right there. There's also Island Bookstore. There's one in Kitty Hawk right on the bypass, not too far from Trio. Trio's the very popular wine bar and eatery right there in Kitty Hawk. So Island Bookstore is right there, and that's a pretty large store, relatively speaking. So you're probably going to find a good selection there. And they have two sister stores. One is in Duck at Scarborough Fair, another nice little shopping area right there in downtown Duck. And the other one is up in Corolla. It's at the Corolla Historic Village, which is right there by the lighthouse. And if you listen to my episode 8 with Megan Agresto, the manager of the Currituck Light, that's just a cool little place right there. She took me on a quick walking tour of the area, and you got the bookstore, you got the village, the lighthouse, Whalehead Club is right there. I mean, it's just so many cool things right there that you can just walk around and check out. So highly recommend that. So there's some bookstores you can support in our area. Check them out. My call to action for this week is, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a rating. You can go to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify and leave a rating for me. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, please form a single file line behind my wife and kids. You will not be alone. Don't forget to check out the website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com. You can always sign up for regular emails and get this information on a regular basis. Be happy to send it out to you. You can unsubscribe at any time, but I think you'll find this stuff pretty good. I only hit you up once or twice a week with emails, and it's usually pretty pertinent. And I'm not standing there with my hand out. I usually give you some good information that you can use. But that's pretty much it for this week. I will be back next week. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch you next time.